With the way that free agency has gone so far, if the Orioles want to add an ace to their rotation this offseason, they might have to go the trade route, just like they did last year. So let's take a look at those ace-type pitchers who could be available via trade. Talk about which ones would fit in Baltimore and what you would like to see that trade look like. It's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, December 12th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at the pitchers who could be traded this offseason because the Orioles may be pivoting to that route to acquire a top-of-the-rotation starting pitcher. And there's been a lot of names that have at least been floated out there in reports who could be available via trade. I'll go through my favorite names on that list, kind of give you a top 6 wish list from the guys that are definitely available. And then I'm taking your suggestions. Over the last week, I have asked for some trade proposals from you, the listeners, and I've picked out 5 of my favorites. We're going to talk about some of these trade proposals for starting pitchers and who says no, who says yes, what that trade could look like. And it's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So let's start with who is out there, right? Because I'm not saying the Orioles are done in free agency. I'm not saying they won't sign another starting pitcher, but a lot of the top names, not all of them, but a lot of the top names, as the winter meetings have come to a close in Dallas, are already off the board. Some of the guys who I wanted to see the Orioles go after and were on either my righty or lefty starting pitcher wish list. Blake Snell is gone. Max Fried is gone. Luis Severino is off the board as well. Yusei Kikuchi is off the board. Nathan Eovaldi is off the board. And so you're left with obviously Corbin Burnes being the number one name who is still out there. And the Orioles are at least playing in those waters a little bit. They've had interest in bringing him back, but who knows if they're going to go to the price that he commands. And maybe there's a chance for Roki Sasaki. He was posted earlier this week, but that's kind of a different conversation. So you're looking at, to me, besides Corbin Burnes, who was in another echelon and might get $300 million for 8-9 years, the Orioles just might not be willing to go that high. I feel like the best 2 starters, maybe best 3 starters available after him are Sean Manaea, Nick Pivetta, and Jack Flaherty. Sean Manaea and Nick Pivetta both have the qualifying offer attached, which means the Orioles would have to give up a draft pick. Now, I've talked about how that doesn't make sense to be scared off by that, but the reporting by Ken Rosenthal has been that the Orioles are a little timid about those players. And then, Jack Flaherty is Jack Flaherty. He was here in 2023. It didn't go great. That probably is a knock on the Orioles' thoughts on bringing him back. So if those are the top 3 left, along with Burnes, who might be out of their price range, you're kind of looking at, well, they could still sign guys like, guys like Andrew Heaney and others who could certainly fit. They're not going to be that impact top 3 starter. So if you're looking for that at this point, you are probably turning to the trade market. And we've seen the Orioles do a great job of getting a top of the rotation guy via trade before. They went out and got Corbin Burnes this time last year. They went out and got Zach Eflin at the trade deadline this year. They have done it before, and they will do it again. Now, the hope was that with David Rubenstein taking over and influxing a lot more cash into this team, that, when you pay for an ace-type starter, all you lose is money. When you got to trade for one, you lose actual players that you might like out of your system. But if this is how the O's are going to do it, they are still equipped with a farm system to get a lot of these deals done. Now, Garrett Crochet is already off the board. We talked about him on yesterday's episode, traded to the Red Sox on Wednesday, but there are still a lot of big names out there. Now, there's a couple of names who I did a wish list. I did a top 6 wish list of starting pitchers who are available via trade. There are other names who could be traded. I wanted to mention just guys who maybe aren't aces right now. Like some of these guys are not number ones at this point, but guys who have at some point in the recent past at least been, the best pitcher on their team for a stretch, right? That's how I kind of sorted this out. They have been an ace at one point or another in the not so distant past. That's what I kind of base this on. Now, Sonny Gray and Zach Gallen are both not going to come up on this list. Sonny Gray, initially, there was reports that he could be traded as the Cardinals look to kind of do a retool. But then Sonny Gray, he has a no trade clause, and he said he probably wasn't going to waive it. So it seems like those trade talks have dissipated. Zach Gallen is another guy. There was reports that, the Diamondbacks are getting trade interest on their entire starting rotation. Gallen is a free agent after next year, but he hasn't really been named specifically. So I'm not going to put him on the list. And then two other guys who could have been on there are Mitch Keller and Jared Jones, two righties from the Pirates. That was a report from Wednesday in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I believe, that the Pirates were potentially looking at, or at least fielding offers for those two guys. Jones, he could be so good. He's got so many years left. I can't see them trading him. And for Mitch Keller, he's still got 4 years left, and he hasn't exactly been great the last season and a half. So maybe he would have fallen on this list, but it was kind of more late breaking when I was doing the notes for this episode. So they are certainly in this conversation as well. But let's start with number 6 on my trade wish list. And that is Rays left-handed pitcher Jeffrey Springs, who is 32 years old at the moment. And he has 3 years and $36 million remaining on the extension he signed with Tampa Bay. So he would be signed through 2025, 26, and 27 before becoming a free agent. Now, John Morosi reported earlier in the offseason that Springs is drawing trade interest. We know the Rays are always willing to trade guys to do things interesting, so that's why I've got him on this list. But he is coming off injury. Springs came over to the Rays back in 2021 as a reliever. He was really good. Then in 22, they just kind of moved him into the starting rotation, and he was just immediately fantastic for the Rays, kind of out of nowhere as a starter. He had an amazing year, was looking to have another amazing year in 2023, and then the elbow injury came. He got Tommy John surgery in April of 2023, came back in July of last year to the major leagues, but was just a different pitcher. The stuff was way down. It didn't really get better as he pitched on in the season, and he went back on the injured list in September with elbow fatigue, and that is pretty much how Jeffrey Springs' season ended. So that's a little concerning. It's a great fastball changeup slider mix from the left-hander. Doesn't throw necessarily hard, but the slider's fantastic. The changeup's fantastic when he was healthy, but it didn't look the same when he came back. And then he went back on the IL with elbow issues. So maybe, he could get back to that great level. And again, for 3 years, $36 million, it's not a big financial commitment, but I would still like to see him pitch better back from the Tommy John. That's why he's all the way down at number 6 on this list. Number 5 for me is Jordan Montgomery of the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's 31, but he will be 32 in a couple of weeks. He has just 1 year remaining on his deal before becoming a free agent. He is owed $22.5 million in 2025 before hitting free agency. Now, Jordan Montgomery was kind of the talk of baseball at this point last year. He was traded to the Rangers at the 2023 trade deadline from the Cardinals, was fantastic down the stretch, was amazing in the postseason, it looked like at times the Rangers' ace as they went and won the 2023 World Series. As he was hitting free agency, it looked like he was making himself a whole lot of money. But there were questions, right? His strikeout rate was going down and down, especially in the playoffs, even though he was getting outs. And there were still questions about what kind of pitcher he really is. And it was just a weird offseason for him and Scott Boras. He did not sign until 2 days before opening day, when he signed a 2-year deal with the Diamondbacks with an opt-out after year 1. It was a very odd offseason. He was not super happy with Scott Boras. I believe he even dropped Boras as his agent, I think, after that. And once he did sign, it took him a while to ramp up. He did come up in mid-April, but you could tell he rushed himself. He wasn't okay. He went on the injured list for a knee issue in July. It was a bad year. It led to a terrible season, led to the Diamondbacks owner publicly saying this offseason that it was a mistake to sign him last year. That pretty much points to, you got to trade this guy. You can't say that and then bring him back on your team in 2025. So I would think among all these pitchers, Jordan Montgomery probably the one who's being shopped most aggressively. Now, the issue is he had, the 5 or 6-ish ERA this season. He was not good at all. He had injuries. The stuff wasn't there. It was a full disaster. Now, some of that could be the awful offseason and the quick ramp up. I refuse to believe that he had one of the very best sinkers in the majors in 2023. And then it literally flipped to be one of the worst sinkers in baseball in 2024. That is his bread and butter pitch. I refuse to think that is going to stick long term. Now, the velocity on that pitch was down almost 2 miles per hour this year. So that's something to be concerned about. But some of that is just that quick ramp up that he had to do. And again, I think he'll be pretty cheap. Not only do the D-backs want to trade him, I bet they'll be willing to eat some of that $22.5 million he's owed for next year just to get something for him and get him off this roster. So he'll probably be the cheapest guy on this list. If the O's think he can bounce back in any way, the old version of Jordan Montgomery is really, really good. Maybe he'd be refreshed with a new team, a regular offseason, and could help the Orioles next year. Number 4 on my list is a guy that Orioles fans have heard a lot about over the last 3 or so years in terms of trying to trade for this guy. That is Marlins left-hander Jesus Luzardo, who is a left-handed pitcher who has 2 years of arbitration left. So he'll be under arb, not making a crazy amount of money for 2025 and 2026 before he then becomes a free agent. Now, Luzardo's had his own issues with injury, missed half of 2022 with a forearm strain. 2023, he was good. It was a full, healthy MLB season, but that was really his only one. Then he missed most of last season with a lumbar stress reaction in his back. Kind of a weird injury, not an arm injury, but not a good injury. A back injury is something you don't want to play around with. Now, he still has a great four-seamer. His slider had a 52% swing and miss rate in 2023. One of the best sliders from any starter in baseball is what Luzardo has in his arsenal. Again, he is only 27 years old. He'd still be pretty cheap for 2 years. He's clearly a bounce-back candidate because he has the stuff, but once again, the question about Jesus Luzardo is his health with the forearm and then really the back issue that took him out for most of last year. Like, what would you get from Luzardo? And the other thing is, would the Marlins really want to trade him now? His value is way down. He missed most of last year with a back issue. What the Marlins would want to do if they're wanting to trade Luzardo is bring him back, have him pitch well in the first half, and then deal him at the deadline this season. If I were the Marlins, that's what I would do. And even with Peter Bendix in charge, you still kind of never know what the Marlins are up to. Now, they are still clearing house. Like, they even traded Jake Berger this week, one of their few remaining players who is not like a rookie at this point. But we'll see. Luzardo, the upside is super high with that stuff. It's injury questions. It's questions will the Marlins actually deal him. But as happens every offseason, teams are at least sniffing around to try and get Jesus Luzardo. We know the Orioles have been interested in the past. I'm sure they're interested now, but it's all about what the price would be and the Marlins' willingness to move him, because obviously trades more than anything are a two-way street. But those are the guys that have some questions. The top 3 on this list, they have question marks as well, but they are closer and closer to that true ace in your rotation. And these are more veteran guys that the Orioles could go after that I'll talk about coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we move on to the top 3 of this potentially traded starting pitcher wish list for the Orioles this offseason. These are guys who have all had some smoke around them potentially being dealt, and who could all be classified still as aces at this point, and if not, very close to it, and have been them very recently. Number 3 on this list is Seattle Mariners right-handed pitcher Luis Castillo, who actually turned 32 today. So happy birthday, Luis Castillo. He has 3 years and $72.45 million remaining on that extension with the Mariners, so he would be signed through 2027. Before becoming a free agent. Now, he also has a $25 million vesting option for 2028 on his contract. What that means is if he throws at least 180 innings in 2027, he would automatically get an extra year on his deal for $25 million in 2028. So basically, if he were to stay healthy, it's really 4 years and about $100 million remaining on his deal instead of just the 3 years. So the Orioles would have to be willing to probably eat most of that money if they wanted to go and get Luis Castillo. But Reports from Ryan Divish of the Seattle Times coming out on Wednesday that the Mariners are looking for right-handed hitting corner infielders, some veterans, and may be open to trading Castillo this offseason. Now, Luis Castillo has stayed mostly durable. He missed a couple of weeks this September with a hamstring strain, but otherwise, as you know, you've been able to pencil him in for 30-plus starts the past few seasons, especially in Seattle. But he's really kind of changed the pitcher he was the last couple of years. When he was in Cincinnati, he had like maybe the best changeup among starters in all of baseball, just dominating with that pitch, the righty changeup. He still throws it, but when he came to Seattle the last couple of years, he's changed some things up. His ground ball rate used to be around like 55%. That's elite for a starter. It's now under 40%, which is like not even looking at a guy who even leans towards a ground ball pitcher when he used to be a major ground ball pitcher with Cincinnati and in his first couple of years with the Mariners. And that is because his sinker and his changeup was his bread and butter, got swings and misses and got a lot of ground balls. He's thrown less of those in favor of throwing more four-seamers and more sliders over the past couple of years. Now, the data has backed it up because his four-seamer, according to Baseball Savant run value, has graded out super, super well. But he did used to have maybe that best changeup in baseball, and now it's his number 4 used pitch. So, you know, and his numbers have been getting a little bit worse, not crazy worse, but a little bit worse since he's made those changes. He pitches in the most pitcher-friendly ballpark in Seattle. That certainly helps him. Definitely had some weird road splits the past couple of years as well. So there are question marks around Luis Castillo, but at worst, I mean, he's a horse who's going to get you close to 200 innings, and at worst, like a high 3s to 4 ERA, who has some really good stuff still and is only 32. And if you're willing to pay the money, you would have for 4 more years. Like, that's still a pretty good floor. And even if he regresses a little bit, he's still going to give you innings. And this is a trade that kind of close to what the Houston Astros did when Mike Elias was there in Houston, is that they didn't give out a lot of huge free agent contracts. But what they did was trade for some guys with multiple years on their deal who had some money to be paid, and just paid those contracts to get those guys in for a more set amount. Like, the contract was already signed by another team. When you trade for a guy, even if he's on a big contract, you know exactly how many years and how much money you have to pay him to bring him in. And the Astros kind of prefer doing that in their run. And maybe that's something the Orioles could do. And maybe Luis Castillo is someone who they could target there. And the Orioles certainly have some corner infielders that they could trade away in that sense as well. Number 2 on my list, staying in the AL West, it is Framber Valdez, the 31-year-old left-hander with the Houston Astros, who will be a free agent after the 2025 season. He is in his final year of arbitration. MLB Trade Rumors projects he will make $17.8 million this year in ARB and then hit free agency. He is honestly very similar to the situation that Corbin Burnes was in last year. Now, Burnes, a better pitcher than Valdez, Valdez would probably cost less than Corbin Burnes did for the Orioles last year, but it's an ace-type guy who's in his final year of ARB, and his team, despite being a good team, right? Brewers a good team, Astros a good team, trying to win a World Series, are at the point where they don't maybe feel they're going to be able to re-sign him to an extension, and instead are like, let's trade him and get something back before he becomes a free agent. There were reports from Chandler Rome, who covers the Astros for The Athletic, that the Astros were listening to offers on Kyle Tucker and Framber Valdez, and maybe he could be dealt because maybe they just don't plan to extend him after this season. Now, Valdez did have an elbow issue this year. He missed most of April with elbow inflammation, but he came back, and there really wasn't a drop in his stuff numbers, which is good. And he still had a very, very good year, stayed healthy the rest of the year for the Astros, pitched game 1 of the wild card series. Like, he was still mostly usual Framber Valdez, but we did see a velo drop. 2023 average sinker velocity, 95.3 miles an hour. This year, 94.1 miles an hour. He was down over a mile an hour on that average sinker velocity, which is his bread and butter pitch. That's a little concerning. Now, he's, still before he had this elbow issue and it knocked down his innings total a little bit. He threw basically 200 innings in 22 and 23 for the Astros, and really good innings as well. Not a crazy big strikeout pitcher, but gets his strikeouts, doesn't walk a lot of guys, and he had a top 5 ground ball rate in all of baseball. Like, he's pushing 60+% ground ball rates as a starter. That is elite. It's something that really helped him, with a lefty pitching in front of the Crawford boxes in left field in Houston. A little bit of a nicer ballpark in Baltimore, even with the wall moving back in a bit in left field. those ground balls could help him even more, and he could get away with maybe even a few more fly balls if he came to Baltimore. Now, the elbow is a bit concerning. And again, you'd only get him for 1 year, so you have to make sure it's the right price. And he's good. He's an ace, but he is not Corbin Burns, so you have to weigh that in what you're willing to give up in a trade there. But if you feel he's healthy and can at least be healthy for one more season, even if you don't plan on re-signing him, man, he would be a great lefty addition to the top of this Orioles rotation. But I do have one guy who I rank above Framber Valdez. And that is a guy who we wanted the Orioles to trade for last offseason. It didn't happen. And he might be back on the market. That is Dylan Cease. 28-year-old righty will be 29 in a couple of weeks, of the San Diego Padres, who will be a free agent after next season, and will be trade rumors projecting him to get $13.7 million in arbitration in his final year of ARB this year. You might be saying the Padres are going to trade Dylan Cease. They just traded for him last offseason. That they did. The Orioles were interested in Cease last offseason, but the White Sox ended up dealing him to the Padres. Cease had a great year in San Diego. But the Padres, Peter Seidler's death has put their financial situation in a tough spot. They are looking to shed some payroll, and they're looking to shed some guys who, are going to be free agents. They probably aren't going to be able to re-sign. One of those guys is Dylan Cease, and he would be one of the guys among any of them who would bring back the most in a trade, despite the fact that he only has 1 year left on his deal. Now, he did have a bit of a down year in Chicago in 2023, but he absolutely bounced back with a great season in 2024 through a no-hitter. This year for the Padres, had a 2.66 ERA in the second half. He finished the season really, really strong. It's one of the best sliders in the league with a 159 batting average against, a 45% swing and miss rate, and with a 96.9 mile per hour average velocity on his four-seam fastball this year. That was the hardest he's ever thrown his fastball in a full big league season. So it's almost like Cease, about to turn 29, is still getting better. Like, he is right in his prime. He is a no doubt ace to add to your rotation. Now, if the Padres really are going to trade him, everybody is going to want him, even more so than they did when the White Sox were looking to deal him last offseason. So it could cost you something, but man, oh man, this could be the time, because in theory, he's still going to cost a little less than last year because he's only got 1 year of control instead of 2. This could be the guy to put at the top of the Oriole rotation. I've got him at the top of this wish list. But those are all the players that are available. But it's a little different when you do this wish list for traded players rather than free agents. Free agents, it's just, here's what they'll probably cost. You pay that. Hopefully you get them. For trades, it's, you got to offer up players and money, and who knows what this team wants versus what this team wants versus what the years of control is, what the money is, what the true value is. It's hard to predict trades. But I allowed you all, the listeners, to try and do it. And thank you all who submitted your mock trades. I might get to some more of them later this offseason on the show. But I picked my favorite 5 for some of these pitchers we just talked about. And I'm going to read them out to you. And I want you all listening, you all watching, to give me your thoughts in the comments section. That'll be coming up next to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, we're in the offseason. You're not buying baseball tickets for a little while, but basketball, football, hockey, get the tickets on Game Time. Get great deals. Maybe it's just, hey, baseball's my sport. I want to do some other things in the offseason. Okay, totally get it. Well, with Game Time Picks, the curation makes it easier to save more on not just sports tickets, but also concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So to finish things up here, I solicited your mock trades. These are all coming from listeners or viewers of the podcast. And I want you, if you're listening or watching right now, jump into the comment section. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. And let me know in the comment section about each of these 5 trades what you think. Would the Orioles say no? Would the other team say no? And specifically, would you say yes and do this trade? Thank you, everyone who sent your submissions in. This was pretty fun. We're going to start with MC on YouTube, who says the Orioles receive Luis Castillo from the Seattle Mariners. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm kind of going to put the full trade up on the screen beside me so you can see it. And on the flip side, the Seattle Mariners get Ryan Mountcastle, Heston Kjerstad, Cade Povich, and minor league outfielder Judd Fabian. Now, if you're asking me who says no, I think the Mariners might say yes to this one. You're getting rid of Luis Castillo, who's been a big part of your rotation, but you have rotation depth. You are getting Ryan Mountcastle. They absolutely need a first baseman, specifically a right-handed hitting first baseman. You get 2 years of Ryan Mountcastle. Maybe Seattle zaps his power. It's done it to a lot of righties, but you might as well try with another one. You get Heston Kjerstad, who you can stick into your outfield immediately, outfield/DH. Now, they do have Randy Arozarena and Julio Rodriguez and Luke Raley in that outfield mix, but there's some more openings at first base DH. You get Mountcastle and Kjerstad. You can throw them both in there. You get Judd Fabian as a prospect that could be ready to come up, maybe if you lose Randy Arozarena after next year when he hits free agency. And then you get Cade Povich, who, they may have different evaluations on him, whether he's ready for opening day. But at best, if you really believe in Cade Povich, he slots in and fills in for Luis Castillo, and you still have a full rotation heading into 2025. I think the Mariners would absolutely say yes to this deal. And if you're the Orioles or you're MC running the Orioles and you want to get Castillo, I think these 4 players would get it done. Maybe our guys Ty and Colby from Locked On Mariners, if they're listening or tuning in, maybe I'll reach out to them. We'll see if they would accept this kind of trade for getting back 3 and then most likely, honestly, 4 years of Luis Castillo left on his contract. But if I'm the Orioles, I'm a little hesitant to do this to include all 3 of Mountcastle, Kjerstad, and Povich. I think the one that would hurt the most would be Povich, just because you are trading away from the pitching depth. Now, you're getting a starter in return, and obviously Luis Castillo right now, a large upgrade over, Cade Povich could be really good one day, but what Cade Povich is right now for the Orioles trying to win a World Series in 2025. But maybe if I'm the O's, I would want to take one player out of that, but let me know. If you're the Orioles, do you do that? I think the Mariners would do this deal. Next one is from Robert. This one also came via YouTube. This is a large Dylan Cease trade proposal. This is the Orioles get Dylan Cease from the San Diego Padres, and in return, the Orioles give up Dean Kramer, Ryan Mountcastle, Chase McDermott, Cionel Perez, and minor league outfielder Tavian Josenberger. Now, similar to the Mariners one, I think the Padres might think about saying yes to this deal. First of all, they get at least a replacement in the rotation for now for Dylan Cease in Dean Kramer, someone who you get 3 more years of team control, who is much, much cheaper. Now, Dean Kramer, of course, is not nearly the pitcher Dylan Cease is. Cease is a number 1. Kramer is a number 4 or 5, but you can still at least slot him into your rotation. And the Padres do have a lot of young pitchers in AAA who they're trying to call up at some point this year. Kramer could be the bridge to get to those guys. You get Ryan Mountcastle, who could help your lineup. The Padres are potentially shopping Luis Arraez. You trade him, you have a little more of an opening in your infield and at first base for potentially Ryan Mountcastle. You get Chase McDermott, who, even if you don't use him as a starter, the Padres, AJ Preller, would love to immediately use him as a bullpen arm. And hey, maybe if they get Chase McDermott, they'd be willing to just not keep Juan Nunez on their roster from the Rule 5 draft and send him back to the Orioles during spring training. You get Cionel Perez. Again, also, they're looking to add to their bullpen. Wandy Peralta didn't work out like they liked, their left-hander in that pen. They're losing Tanner Scott after trading for him. Perez would be a good lefty to add. And then you get an interesting, versatile, athletic prospect in Tavian Josenberger to put in your system. I think the Padres say yes because they get the shed payroll like they wanted. All these guys, Kramer, Mountcastle, McDermott, Perez, Josenberger, come in pretty cheap. And they get major league players back because they are a team that is trying to win the World Series in 2025. I don't know if they want all prospects in a deal like this. Helps their bullpen, helps their rotation. The only thing is, even with them looking to trade Luis Arraez, I'm not sure they really want Ryan Mountcastle. They already have a super logjam in their infield. So maybe if the Padres wanted it, it wouldn't include Mountcastle. Maybe instead it includes another prospect. So you get the 3 big leaguers in McDermott, Mountcastle, and Perez. And then you get Josenberger and another prospect, I think would do it more so. I just don't know if the Orioles do this trade. Like, that's a lot of guys to be given up from your team. But again, it's none of your top prospects. So I think I would do this trade. I don't know if Mike Elias would, but let me know what you think about that one. Thank you, Robert, for sending that one in. Next one is from Angel, who emailed this in. And shout out to Angel, who said, coming from the Dominican Republic. Angel, shout out to you in the DR for checking in on the Orioles here with the Locked On Orioles podcast. Appreciate the listen. He's got a much simpler much, much simpler Dylan Cease offer. Now, this is still for Dylan Cease, but he said, give the Padres Coby Mayo and then some other prospect not named Samuel Basallo. He basically said, Connor, take it any way you want, or at least that's how I interpreted it. So I put Chase McDermott in this deal as well. So I have it as Dylan Cease for Coby Mayo and Chase McDermott. Now, the Padres basically get two essentially top 100 prospects. Mayo, top 10 guy. McDermott should be a guy right around the middle to the bottom half of a top 100. They get two guys who are, I think, ready to be plugged in at the big league level in 2025, and they come much, much cheaper. They're coming on the league minimum. You get rid of the $14-15 million you would owe Dylan Cease if you're looking to cut payroll. Even if McDermott's not ready to be a starter, you can put him right into your bullpen. Mayo's the tricky one because, again, they have a very crowded infield, but maybe if they do trade a rise, they open up some DH at-bats. They are looking to move Xander Bogaerts. Him and Manny have gotten a little more injured over the past years, and they've played a lot of kind of lesser guys at third base and shortstop at times because of injuries. Coby Mayo is a much better depth option to have, and you could season him a little more at AAA if you need to because he did struggle at the big leagues this year. But this would be an interesting trade. It would be hard for me to part with both Mayo and McDermott because, I mean, those might be the two Orioles prospects I am highest on in the system right now are Mayo and McDermott. So for me personally, it's tough to part with those guys. But if you could get Dylan Cease, I might think about that one. I'm definitely a thinker from Angel. Looks like Fabian has a trade for us as well. Fabian sending this one in via email. He's going the Framber Valdez situation here. The Orioles get Framber Valdez from the Astros, and the Astros get Heston Kjerstad, Ryan Mountcastle, and Orioles right-handed pitching prospect Alex Pham. I really like this deal kind of for both sides, right? If you're going to go get an ace and you're the Orioles, you bring in Tyler O'Neill, you're maybe planning on having to give up Heston Kjerstad if you want to go get a number one guy. Ryan Mountcastle is someone who seems tradable right now, and Alex Pham is a good pitching prospect, but the Orioles didn't protect him for the Rule 5 draft, and he's kind of an interesting arm. Now, Fabian basically, when he emailed me, said, hey, Framber Valdez for Ryan Mountcastle, who says no. The Astros are not taking just Ryan Mountcastle because Mountcastle, coming off some down years, he only has 2 years of team control left, so it's not like you get him for a long time. They would need something more. That's why I threw in Kjerstad and Pham. So this wasn't exactly Fabian's deal, but it kind of got me in this direction. I think you'd have to throw in a legit prospect, maybe a low-level arm. That's why I threw in Pham and Kjerstad as well. But here's why it works for the Astros. First of all, the Astros need a first baseman. They need one bad. Ryan Mountcastle would fill that hole easily for the next 2 years. And think about Ryan Mountcastle not pulling the wall in Baltimore. Now put him in Houston with the Crawford boxes out there and left. You would unlock the old version of Ryan Mountcastle. The Astros would love that. Heston Kjerstad. Remember, the Astros are thinking about also trading Kyle Tucker, who's a free agent after this year. Even if they don't trade him and they hold on to him, Heston Kjerstad is your right field replacement for Kyle Tucker, 2026 and beyond. And if you do trade him, you don't have to worry about getting Tucker's replacement back in that deal because you would have him in Heston Kjerstad. And then Alex Pham, just kind of an interesting arm to add to the mix in that deal. I think I would do this trade. I think the Astros would do this trade. I think if I have to rank the best trades, maybe on this episode, I don't know if I'd make this the winner. This wasn't the exact one from Fabian. I kind of like the one from Angel as well. These are some of the best ones. That could be an interesting deal. Let me know your thoughts on that one. But we got one more to get to. This is from Ben via email. This is a Mitch Keller deal. Now, I didn't talk a lot about Mitch Keller from the Pirates. He, potentially is being floated out there in trades. He just got an extension a couple of years ago. He still has 4 years and $70 million remaining on that contract. So you would have him for a while. He's coming off like some solid years, not as good as Keller's been in the past, but he's also a guy who's some really good stuff. And many people think that if Mitch Keller gets traded away from the Pirates, someone will unlock him. Maybe not exactly what happened with Tyler Glasnow and Garrett Cole, but something similar where he has another level to get to if he just gets to a better pitching development system, although the Pirates are getting much, much better at doing that than they have been in the past. But there's some true Mitch Keller truthers out there. But here is that Keller deal from Ben. The Orioles would get Mitch Keller from the Pirates, and the Pirates would get Ryan Mountcastle. He's been a part of pretty much every trade. Center field prospect Enrique Bradfield Jr. and right-handed pitching prospect Trace Bright. Now, those are two guys that the Orioles are high on in their system. The Pirates would get a center fielder. They've been trying O'Neal Cruz out there. I'm not sure how much it's going to work. Bradfield could be a good long-term option for them. Trace Bright, they like intriguing arms that get Ks. Trace Bright is a really intriguing arm who gets Ks. And then the Pirates have just been, for years, trying to find a first baseman. Mountcastle's your guy. Like, they've been paying Rowdy Tellez and others to come in and play that position. No, you just get Ryan Mountcastle for the next 2 years in that position. They need bats. You get him in the middle of your lineup, and then you get two prospects who you can dream on. From the Orioles' perspective, it's like Mountcastle's a little expendable. You get a good starting pitcher for 4 years, and yeah, they have a lot of belief in Bradfield and Bright, but neither of those guys are going to help the Orioles in 2025. They're more targeting 2026, maybe, to come up for the O's. So this, and you get Keller for 4 years, not like you're just banking on 1 year. You get him for 4 years to work in that pitching development. Like, at worst, he's a good number 3. And at best, he's closer to a number 1, what he could be. I really, really like this deal from Ben coming in as well. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for sending in those trade proposals. They were awesome. Might do that in the future. Also, I know some mailbag questions have been coming in. We'll get to those on an episode next week. The plan is right now, not going to record a Friday episode. Listen, at this point, you've gotten 6 straight days of episodes. I recorded Saturday and Sunday for the Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez signings, then Monday through Thursday here for the winter meetings. Now, if the Orioles do make a move on Friday, I'll certainly have an episode for you. But if not, going to take the weekend off, and we'll be back on Monday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.